A debate in Illinois over how to regulate hemp products continues, with some calling for action and others calling for sensible regulations. Hemp is a part of the cannabis family, but is not the same as marijuana, which was legalized for recreational use since 2020. Last year, the debate over hemp revolved around regulating certain intoxicating hemp products like Delta 8. That move saw support from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, but never advanced. Leaders with the Illinois Health Alternatives Association are advocating for what they call common sense regulations to keep hemp products illegal, but to tax them.
The hemp industry is a billion-dollar industry, and right now it's not regulated in such a way as to provide additional taxation, which is a revenue source that the state badly needs.